The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show. I hope you're having a great Saturday, great weekend, and thank you for joining us on the Saturday night for what I think is going to be a fun Q&A. We've got a bunch of my $25 a month supporters on Zoom, and they're going to be given priority in terms of asking the questions. We've also got the super chat open on YouTube, so you have access to it over there. And yeah, I think that's it. I think we're ready to roll. All right. In terms of shows this week, I think there'll be a show tomorrow. Not sure exactly what time. I'll try to let you know via Twitter and Facebook as soon as I find out. But other than that, we're going to jump in. And I'm just going to go in the order that you guys' names. Let me stop recording this. We don't need to record it because we're streaming it. All right. I'm just going to go by the order of the names that I have on the top of my screen. I will unmute you, and then you can ask a question. I'm going to try to keep you muted when I'm not asking you specifically a question, because otherwise it'll get pretty rowdy. There are quite a few people on the phone today, so we'll see how many rounds we'll have an opportunity to go. Once we do a round with them, if there are any super chat questions, I will take them. So, all right, let's start with Roy. Let me see. I guess I can't unmute you, Roy. Ask to unmute. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Yeah. Hey there.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I have a COVID question. Now,
Sure.
a couple of times you've said that while you advocate using masks, you think it should not be mandatory. So I was thinking about it, and I think there may be some situations in which I could justify it being mandatory. I'll explain. First of all, if someone has tested positive and that person has to leave his quarantine, he should be required to wear a mask. That's that special situation. Mm-hmm. But now, because of the dismal state of testing in this country, most people have no idea what their status is. And on top of that, there are people who could be positive, but are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic and could infect others. So now, if we now narrow this down further, I think private businesses, shops, department stores, restaurants should be able to set whatever policy they want. And if customers can decide whether it's an acceptable policy or not. And if masks aren't required in a shop, they can say, well, no, I don't want to take a chance. But then there are situations in which that option isn't available. I'm thinking of crowded city streets and subways, which should be private, but they're not. But yep. Subways and buses.
Yep.
So there, particularly in subways and buses, wherever they are, and city streets where there are cities and where it's fairly crowded in the street, I could see, having it mandatory makes some sense. However, I would exclude states or counties or areas where there's a very low incidence of COVID. And then I just think there's just a certain amount of risk one has to accept in life. So that's what I was thinking. What do you think?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. I think that the challenges you brought up is the incompetence of our government. That is the fact that testing is so inefficient, the fact that we don't get results. All of that is really the real barrier. But I agree. If you test positive, then you're supposed to be in isolation, and the government should have the power to isolate you. And if you, for some reason, have to go outside, then or interact with other human beings, they deliver you food or things like that, yeah, you should be required to wear a mask while you're doing that. in terms of private businesses, absolutely. Private businesses should have complete authority in terms of what they want. They don't want anybody to wear a mask. That's fine. And as long as everybody knows that, you can choose not to go to that private business if you feel unsafe. So again, private businesses should be able to make those rules and announce them and let people know what the rules are. The same, I think, actually applies in places like public transportation. So the public transportation authority can decide, just like a bus company would if it was private, the bus company authority can say, we don't require masks, or we do require masks, and you can choose to get on the bus or not to get on the bus based on that. So but they need to make it explicit, and they need to make it well known. And if they require masks, I think that's completely within their authority. For this kind of purpose, they function like a private company. In terms of the streets, that's where I think it gets complicated. I don't think the government can require masks in the streets. Of course, if we had private property, there would be no. If we had capitalism, there would be no public property, and all these problems would go away because street owners would make decisions about those streets and dictate whether in their streets they allowed it or didn't allow it. And then there's the question of morality. That is, if you don't know whether you have it, or what is your responsibility, and what is your responsibility if you suspect you might have it, but you don't have the test back. And all of these are kind of moral questions. And some of the challenges we face today, rather than legal questions, some of the challenges we face today is that because it's being politicized, we can't even talk about them. They're not even legitimate questions. It's off the table to have a proper discussion about it. So, and of course, in a capitalist society where everything is private property, all of these problems are much, much simpler. And the government cannot mandate everybody wear masks because they can't mandate what you can do in your own private property. Again, with the exception of if you've tested positive, and depending on the nature of the virus, they have a role in limiting your exposure to other people. So there are all kinds of things like that. I mean, during the AIDS epidemic, I mean, it was completely legitimate for the government to say, you have a responsibility to let your partner know if you have AIDS. You're carrying this deadly disease around. You can't not disclose it. That is illegal not to disclose it to a sexual partner. So once you're a carrier, the state has a role in limiting or delimiting your behavior, delimiting what you can and cannot do.
Yeah, my one concern there is some people don't have the option of not taking the bus or the subway to get to work. I used to go to work by taxi. That's me, yeah. And it's.
But imagine if those buses or subways are private property, and.
Oh yeah.
Then they could decide either way. So you'd still be stuck as an individual who has to take them. I mean, emergency times suck, and some people suffer more than other people. That's just reality. And sometimes that'll be bad. People will suffer. We can't eliminate suffering in that sense when a disaster like this happens. Maybe there's a charity that provides people with Uber rides or with taxi rides or whatever who are particularly susceptible. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, if you wear a mask, you're also reducing the probability that you will get it from somebody who's not wearing a mask. So a lot of it is about you taking responsibility for your own life.
Sure. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Roy. Nick. You have to unmute. There you go. Yep.
Okay, so my question for you, Yaron, is on this sports event in the national anthem. Nobody's denying that, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but nobody's denying players' right to kneel to the national anthem, just like nobody's denying people's right to burn the American flag. I'm just curious what your position is in terms of optics like the NFL is introducing the supposed black national anthem called "Lift Every Voice and Sing," where all the players, the optics, where all the players are going to stand up, and then when the American national anthem plays, secondly, everybody's going to be kneeling down. Then we have the NBA, which I know you're familiar with because you watch the NBA.
Yeah.
They're all going to be wearing on their jerseys, or the majority of the players on their jerseys, they have approved social justice warrior woke messages, yet they're not allowed to put messages such as free Hong Kong or free the Uyghurs.
Sure.
I mean, the hypocrisy behind it.
Sure.
So I just wanted to ask you what your opinion is in terms of this
Sure.
fake.
Yeah. So, I mean, first, these are private businesses. They should be allowed to do whatever the hell they want. That is, if they want to have Black Lives Matter splattered on the courts and on their jerseys, they have every right to do that. And you as a fan have every right and opportunity not to watch the games and to let them know loudly that you will not watch the games. I think it's complete capitulation. I think it's complete surrender to an anti-American agenda and to the worst elements within the left. And it's one thing, I think. See, I wasn't very critical of Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick had a particular view. I thought he was wrong, but he had a particular view. He used the national anthem and the stage that he had to express himself, and he believed it. And okay, fine. I mean, I wasn't particularly offended by the fact that one or two or a dozen players knelt during the national anthem. This is their beliefs. I don't like them. I don't agree with those beliefs, but it doesn't offend me that they're kneeling in front of, in the national anthem. But when the entire league, when it becomes systematic, when everybody just capitulates and everybody just caters to the worst elements, within this political correctness. And when you know that a big part of what they're doing is motivated by fear and motivated by guilt, not motivated by belief, right? If you believe in certain ideas, even if though they're wrong, then within a range of beliefs, I respect your integrity and I respect the fact that you're willing to kneel or to offend some people, to express your ideas. But when you're doing it just out of complete cynicism, right? Because out of sucking up to a particular ideology or trying to appeal or trying to appease, then I have no respect for you. So I have no respect for the NBA. And you're absolutely right. The fact that they will not have free Hong Kong, the fact that they are completely beholden to the Chinese and they won't stand up to the Chinese, but they will. So they won't stand up to Chinese and they won't stand up to the left in the United States. So, they are complete sellouts, and it's tragic that this is what American business has become, and that this is what the American people are willing to tolerate. And again, I'm not talking about somebody kneeling. I'm talking about the massive, systematic, institutionalized capitulation to this particular point of view. If they think, there's issues with police brutality, BLM doesn't represent that. If they think there's still racism in America, BLM and a lot of these slogans, these anti-racist slogans that they're putting up there, don't represent true opposition to racism. And they're not doing it because they believe it. They're doing it because they think that it's the politically correct thing to do, and they'd be guilted into it. So it's one more example of the complete decay of this country, when businessmen are not willing and feel like, and some of them, I know this because I speak to businessmen, some of them feel like they cannot actually say what they think, not just out of fear from what their customers or what their press or what the media or what politicians will say about them, but to some extent because what they fear from their employees and they fear from their board of directors. And they are kind of not forced in a coercion way, but forced in the sense of they're just not brave enough to stand up to this, or they fear really losing their business or losing an incredible amount of business because of the employees on the board, they capitulate. And it's not necessarily that I blame them. I blame this environment that has brought this around. And again, I think it's another indication of the decay of this country and the decay of the business class and the decay of people's inability to think for themselves. Does that answer it? I can't hear you, Nick.
Yeah.
Yep, good. Thanks. All right, Stephen.
Hey, Yaron, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good deal. First of all, just want to say thank you for what you're doing and all the content you put out. I really appreciate it. It's been great,
Thanks.
especially with lockdowns and all that. So appreciate it.
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about your show on cancel culture. I thought it was a great show, and I really agreed with everything you said around the issue of rights versus free speech. But one of the things that's kind of been bothering me that I've been thinking about is just, so when you talk about people getting fired potentially for opinions that they voice, I agree that the companies have a right to fire who they want or whatever, but also it feels like in society today and the way the laws are set up, you can't really fire people for whatever you want. I mean, I couldn't fire someone because they said I'm a communist, or I think the earth is 6,000 years old, or, you know, like they would, even in an at-will state, you'd probably be hit with a lawsuit. Not to mention, it's hard to fire someone for poor performance, from my experience.
Particularly California, yeah.
Yeah, which happens where I live.
Yeah.
So, you know, with that said, it kind of strikes me as more important to focus on the fact that people are being fired for posting a random view on Twitter that doesn't fit with a woke narrative, even if it's something that's, you know, should be up for debate.
Sure.
Within kind of the, you know, the intellectual discussion. And one thing I think is analogous is something you said about like anti-discrimination laws. Yeah. Basically that they probably shouldn't exist, or they shouldn't exist, but because they exist, you can't just have one group that's allowed to be discriminated against and not others. Like you can't just say I'm gonna not allow gay people, but everything else is illegal or whatever. And that yeah. kind of, I think, is where I come down on the cancel culture thing.
But I think that's true with regard to cancel culture as well. I mean, James Damore, do you remember James Damore, who was fired from Google for that memo on female programmers versus male programmers or something like that? I mean, he sued Google. I don't know what happened, but he sued Google. My expectation is that Google probably settled or that it went to court, and he has a good chance of winning. So I think the laws today are going to make it so that it's very difficult for businesses to cancel somebody in terms of fire somebody because of their points of view. That I think it really is the case that what you're saying is true, that these laws need to be applied consistently if they exist, even though we're against them. But once you have a law, it has to be applied consistently. That's part of what the rule of law means. And that if you can't fire somebody for being a communist, then you shouldn't be able to fire somebody for being conservative, let's say, or somebody for thinking that women are genetically not as good programmers or whatever. So I think in reality, that's really what's going to happen. I think a lot of the people who have gotten fired are going to sue. I think that, you know, even what's her name, Barry Weiss, who resigned. Wasn't fired, but she implies in her letter that she could sue the New York Times for a hostile work environment, you know, the hostility of her workers. Again, I don't believe that such laws should exist, but given that they exist, I think people are going to use them. And I think there are going to be a lot of lawsuits around this. And I don't think that. So let me be clear. While I think in a free market, everybody has a right to fire people and so on, I don't think it's moral to fire people because you disagree with them. But it is true that let's say I am a capitalist, let's say I am who I am, and I have an employee and I suddenly discover the employee is really a communist. I want to fire him, and I would fire him, and it's moral to fire him, right? So, and even if I was in the finance business, I don't want to deal with communists. Or if a communist is running a factory and he discovers somebody's a capitalist, I think it's okay for them to fire them in a free market. But I agree with you. In the world we live in today, the laws need to be applied consistently, and I think they will be. That is, I think that the legal system, the laws that we have, are still one of the saner places. Again, the laws are bad, but the way they're applied is still saner than maybe some of the other parts of our culture. That makes sense?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what you said. I do worry about people who kind of the less not well known, not well off. If they're victims of this, they probably won't be able to sue, and it's a bummer. But yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting whether employment lawsuits can be done on contingency. I don't know, but you're right. I mean, and that's always the case, right? It's always the case that the people, the people who suffer the most are the people who are. It's like Roy's question. The people who suffer the most are the people who don't have much, and who so-called the state is always there to protect. And of course, they're the ones who get harmed. They're the ones who fall by the wayside. But it's rough out there right now, and it's rough to speak out, and it's difficult. And I don't blame people for staying silent, and I don't blame businessmen for giving in, and because you could be wiped out. You could be wiped out. Thanks, Stephen. Let's see. So those of you curious who are listening, you're curious on how to get on this call. Everybody who's on the call is a $25 a month supporter of the show. And if you want to become a $25 a month a supporter of the show at $25 a month or more, and then you can join this call next month, then you can do so at yaronbrookshow.com/support, Patreon, Subscribestar, or Locals. And if you put in a regular subscription of $25, you will be invited to participate in a call like this next time. All right, Eric, it's your turn.
Hi, Yaron. How are you?
Also asking how to pronounce my name.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't hear all the distortions and perversions anymore because people have been doing this since I was a kid. So, when I lived in America when I was a kid, and then certainly when I emigrated here. And so my name's in Hebrew is Yaron, but Americans can't say Yaron, and I wouldn't expect them to. So Yaron, something like that. Yaron.
All right, Yaron, thanks. So yeah, this is my first time Zooming in. So I just first wanted to thank you for your passionate intellectual guidance in our world. It's really refreshing to experience your integrity and consistent standard for the truth, basically no matter what. So our world definitely needs more people like you.
Thanks. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Love to meet them. Yeah.
I was recently listening to Leonard Peikoff's course on moral judgment, which is great, by the way.
Yes, I do recommend it.
He described the characteristics of people that are classified as evil, and that Kant is the most evil man. It's hard for me to grasp that anyone can be so evil as Kant, in that his philosophy has the direct purpose of destroying the mind. I haven't read any of his works yet, so from your knowledge, was that Kant's stated goal to destroy the mind? Was his consciousness really that corrupt that he believed in his own philosophy? Or did he know his philosophy was irrational, but spread his ideas anyway?
I don't know firsthand, right? So I'm not a philosopher, and I'm certainly not an expert on Kant, and I don't know enough about him. So everything I know is from the same sources probably you know. It's Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff. I've tried to read Kant directly and I can't get through it. It's just mind numbing. And it's not worth the effort. It's just not worth the effort of trying. So I've read a number of secondary sources on Kant, and I think Ayn Rand, based on the secondary sources, gets him right. And I think certainly and Leonard does. There's something about his philosophy and when it arises, right? When he develops it at the kind of the height of the Enlightenment is sweeping over the West. It's really taking over Europe and taking over the New World. And it is the philosophy of the future. And the fact that he would almost, and he says, because he says he's trying to save faith from reason in the introduction to his famous book, he is trying to slow down the Enlightenment. He is trying to destroy the Enlightenment. And how conscious he is of what that will do to human life. Can Kant literally project that his philosophy, as ominous parallels, Dr. Peikoff's book shows, will lead to the Nazis and to the gulags of communism? I don't know. Probably not. He would probably go crazy if he could imagine that. So what he actually was conscious of, I think clearly what he was conscious of is he wanted to destroy the Enlightenment. Was he conscious of the consequence of that to human life? And did he fully realize the greatness of the Enlightenment, the importance of the Enlightenment to human flourishing, to human success, to human happiness in the future? I don't know. And I don't know. And I take Leonard at his word, and Ayn Rand at their word, that from everything they know about him, that makes sense. But again, I don't know how much Leonard thinks Kant was conscious of what he was doing in terms of the outcome. I think he was conscious of what he was doing in terms of destroying the Enlightenment. It's just for that, given that the Enlightenment is the greatest intellectual movement, let's say post-Greece ever in human history, certainly in modern times, to destroy that is to destroy the world. And to destroy the world is pretty evil. And to the extent that he knew he was doing that, yeah, that's what would make him evil.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that clarifies things. Makes sense. I appreciate it.
Sure. Good. Thanks, Eric. All right. We've got Emmet. Hey, Emmet.
Hi, Yaron. Thanks for all you do. Really appreciate it.
Sure. I enjoy it, luckily. No sacrifice here.
It shows. So I've noticed in recent years when I'm talking with people over time that they have a hard time distinguishing between a consistent principled approach and a dogmatic approach, a religious approach. I'm wondering, it seems like that might be influenced by kind of a relativism and a subjectivism influence. And I'm wondering, have you experienced this? And if so, how do you help people overcome that viewpoint?
So you're talking about among objectivists or among people in general?
No, not objectivists, typically. People of my acquaintance. Yeah.
Look, I think that religion has a massive impact even on people who are not religious. And religion, of course, is dogma. Religion can be proved. Religious ethics, religious ideas are dogma. And so most people out there don't have any other framework. They don't know anything else. So even when they're rejecting religion, or they're talking politics, or they're talking about something else, that religious framework is what overrides everything else. And yes, at the end of the day, religion is both intrinsic in the sense that the laws are intrinsic, they're there, but it's also subjective because you get to, in a sense, subjectively choose which ones to apply, which religion to follow. And of course, where does the religion itself get its truths? Not from God, so they have to make it up. So it's subjective in that sense. So there is an element of subjectivism, and there's an element of it's their whim, it's their emotion, and they don't know, and this is true of the culture generally, they don't know how to use their mind. They don't know how to use reason as an arbiter of truth. So they are stuck with their emotions, and everything they see around them is modeled after religion. So their emotions, or what they feel is true, becomes dogma, and they become dogmatic about it. And then they look to rationalize it. They look for things in reality because they know they're supposed to prove it. So what they do is they look in reality for things that will justify their beliefs, rather than looking for reality for what the truth is. They're looking for rationalizations. And you see that pattern. And whether it's leftists who have a dogma of, let's say, environmentalism, and it doesn't matter how much evidence you provide them. It doesn't matter how much data you provide them. They will always look to find the next piece, the next thing that they will somehow rationalize it for you. And of course, both on the left and the right, that's what conspiracy theories do. That is, when they run out of stuff in reality to rationalize their beliefs, then they turn to conspiracy theories. And then, since it's a conspiracy theory, you don't need to prove anything because it's a conspiracy. We don't know. Does that make sense?
And I think so. And kind of building on that, they don't know how to recognize a principled approach because they don't recognize any principles.
Yes, they've never been taught principles, because principles are tied to reality. The only things that look like principles are either commandments or rules, or things that they don't put your legs on the sofa, Johnny, and that's it. It's just rules that they're supposed to follow, and that is the closest they've ever got to principles. And maybe if they had a math or science class, they have some notion that they are principles of science or principles of math or something like that. But yeah, our educational system basically grinds principled thinking out of them, and it never teaches them, and it never gives them the tools to actually develop those skills. And parents don't do it either, unfortunately, tragically.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, Emmett. Let's see who we got next. We've got Tom. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Yaron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for everything you're doing. I agree with everyone else. I think you provide a lot of value, so thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to ask you the question. I have a question about the police and law enforcement and whether or not they're duty bound. So what I mean is, if they are duty bound, and I know you don't like that word duty, I don't particularly like it myself, but if they're duty bound, are they derelict if they do not enforce the law, but instead listen to politicians or their immediate superiors on when and how to act, acting subjectively, basically?
Yeah.
And if not, do the oaths that they take have any value at all, or are they just there to follow orders? It seems to me, since they've been granted by society a monopoly on force, that they basically have a duty to, protect us. But I mean, this is particularly troubling with what we've been seeing lately, with them standing down and seeing crimes committed in front of them that they don't react to and things.
I mean, it's a tricky question. Because in a sense, and I don't like the word duty, so I'll call it responsibility. In a sense, they do. They've taken an oath. They've taken an oath to the Constitution. They've taken an oath to protect. They've taken an oath to protect people's lives and to adhere to the law. But it is not their job to interpret the law, and it is not their job unless it's an emergency, unless there's no authority. The police is structured in a very, a top-down manner, and whether that's justified or not is a good question. One would have to think about the other ways in which we could do policing that are better, but they have to follow orders. I mean, if they don't, they get fired, and they lose their job. And it's within the police chief's authority to fire any policeman, just like in any other business. Now, I don't know how these police, if they have integrity, how they can stay on the job. I don't know how they can suffer the humiliation of being told by their superiors not to do their job. I think it's despicable, and it's not fair to the police. Put aside the civilians who are getting hurt. It's not fair to the police. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of the pictures from about a week or two ago in Portland, and then there were pictures like this, and of course there was Minneapolis and other places where the police were basically in Seattle, where they were hounded out of their own precincts, where they were attacked, and their precincts were attacked, their precincts were destroyed. They personally were attacked, and they couldn't fight back. They weren't allowed, fully to defend themselves, and they have to be very careful because now we have laws on what kind of maneuvers they can do. I don't know, chokehold, not chokehold, whatever. When subduing a suspect, I mean, that is ridiculous. If they are being attacked, they should be able to use whatever means are necessary to defend themselves. And I've talked about this. They need to get better training. They need to be able to use non-lethal force in a more effective way. There's a lot that can be done to improve the police's ability to use force. But you're absolutely right. It's ridiculous what's going on. But I don't blame the police because, as long as they can be fired, they have to do what their boss tells them, or resign, or do the thing they think is right and then resign, and then who knows, they could be sued. It's such an impossible position where you put police in today, where they're supposed to uphold the law, except if it's politically incorrect to uphold the law, right? And we also, because of our attitude to demonstrations and because of our attitude to allowing groups of thugs who are going to beat each other up to just demonstrate when we know it's going to lead to violence, and then we put the police in the middle and we put them in an impossible situation. The whole way in which we deal with conflict, the whole way in which we deal with demonstrations, riots, and all this stuff is wrong, and it needs to be completely rethought and redone. And our whole attitude towards police has to change and be redone. But the crippling of the police force is, in spite of the fact that there's no question that there's evidence of police brutality and inappropriateness and so on. And some of that is training, and some of that is accepting into the police for bad apples. And some of it is the war on drugs and so on. But it's our responsibility as voters to vote the mayors and the governors and whoever, or the chiefs of police, out of office if they have done a bad job. I can't blame the police officers themselves just because they're I think they're in an impossible situation.
But I mean, aren't they just reduced to being the goons for the whims of the politicians, or the police chief or whatever that's manipulated by the politicians at the time? They're not
to some extent
enforcing the law, really. They're really just enforcing the whims of today based on whatever the politician or whoever is thinking is important.
Within bounds, right? Because the politician can't say, go beat up on those people, so there's bounds on what the chief of police and the politicians can do. But yeah, within those bounds, they just whatever. But that's true of the law itself as well, right? What is the law today? Isn't it just what the majority expediently in the moment has decided that they want? I mean, and we have a gazillion immoral laws and laws that don't involve any victims, and yet these poor police have to go and enforce laws that are irrational and immoral and wrong, and yet they have to enforce them because they've sworn to do so. So I think this is the danger of a mixed economy. The whole structure of the way our laws are, where there's no principle, the way our police is, how they're guided, how they're managed, all of that is corrupt and corrupting, and it's why I wouldn't want to be a policeman today, and I wouldn't encourage anybody to be a policeman today.
So just one thing on the oaths then. So it seems to me they should be more taking the oaths to their immediate superiors rather than to the Constitution of the state they're working in, or.
Yeah, but they theoretically, if they believed that the people in charge were violating the Constitution. They could override what the people in charge is. But in a world in which we live, where nobody understands what a Constitution means, there are multiple interpretations of it. You know, the law is fuzzy because it depends on majority opinion and it depends on all kinds of political stuff. I can't blame them for not, standing up for their interpretation of the Constitution, because they're probably going to get fired and they're probably going to lose whatever lawsuit they file against the police force. So they're in a no-win situation because of the culture in which we live. And I think singling them out, this issue out, is not useful without the full context that we live in a corrupt culture where Constitution and the rule of law have lost much of their meaning.
All right. Thank you, Yaron. Thanks.
And by the way, that's true of judges. You know, our Congress swears allegiance to the Constitution, right? They don't know what the Constitution is. How many have read the Constitution? How many of them? I mean, they have no concept of what a true allegiance to the Constitution would mean. And that's true of all what we call public servants, of all the people who supposedly work for us. It's a culture-wide phenomena of not knowing what it represents, swearing allegiance to it, but it's meaningless. Okay, thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Let's see, we've got 3 people with just phone numbers, so I'm just going to read your area code. 734, and just maybe tell us what your name is. Oops.
Hi, Jen.
Hello? Go ahead.
Hi, Yaron. It's Jennifer.
Oh, hi, Jennifer. Not used to you calling in by phone.
I just wondered if you ever saw the movie The Hunt for Red October.
Yep.
Yeah.
I did. Sean Connery. It was good. I saw it a long time ago. I think when it first came out, probably in the 80s. And I think it was good. I mean, I think I resisted it a little bit because I thought it portrayed this the Soviet submarine guy too positively because he was a communist, but I think I was probably too harsh. So but it was a good movie. It was very well made.
Yeah, it didn't really. I don't think I remember discussing communism per se, but it did show the Soviet Union as being a bad place. Yes. That you want to leave and go to the good place, the U.S. So I thought it was pretty good.
Yep. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and it's very dramatic. It's very suspenseful and dramatic.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye.
All right, 847. You're unmuted.
Yes, Yaron.
Not great.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Yaron. I got a question. I enjoyed it's Jonathan Honig.
Hey,
I enjoyed your broadcast about investing in the financial markets. Briefly, what do you think the prospect of negative interest rates are in the U.S., and how should one prepare or perhaps kind of try to survive in that type of environment?
I mean, I think it's really, really difficult and bad and bad for the U.S. if it happens. I suspect, I'm going to mute you, Jonathan, just because there's a lot of noise, background noise. I suspect that I think the probability of it happening is low. There are all kinds of institutional financial problems that that the U.S. is unique in, that if they did it in the U.S., it would be really hard, and it would be really cumbersome, and it would really test financial markets. So my general sense is the Fed is going to do what it can to avoid it, to avoid the negative interest rates. But I don't think the probability of it happening is zero. I think the Fed feels like it's desperate, and that is the only thing that will spur the economy somehow. Then they'll do it. I think as long as Congress is willing to borrow money and hand it out, I think that Fed will avoid negative interest rates. Because think about what negative interest rates really are. Negative interest rates is, I'm paying you to take my money. Please take my money, right? And it's a way for the Fed to get money out there into the economy, right? And to force banks to get money out there into the economy, right? So if banks keep their money on reserve at the Fed, they will actually be charged for it. And the Fed will want them to get it out. Don't have it sitting in checking accounts, because the checking accounts are going to yield negative rates. Go spend it, go invest it, go consume, go do something with it. That is one way to generate, what people call, generate more liquidity in the market and more money into the market. And I think if the government is willing, if the executive branch and the Congress is willing to just send people checks, then I think the Fed feels like it doesn't need to do that. One of the reasons they have negative interest rates in Europe is that they can't control the governments. The central bank is truly independent. It's truly a separate entity. In the United States, the central bank is much more integrated. But I wouldn't rule it out. Now, what do you do to protect from it? It's really tough. I mean, you basically invest in things that are going to give you positive returns. So it goes back somewhat to what I talked about earlier, that, in the other show, that if you can find companies that are actually generating profits in an environment like that, find companies that are actually providing dividends or capital gains, then that's where you want the money, because your money will actually produce a return for you, a positive return for you. Stock markets don't necessarily do badly in periods of negative interest rates. I would stay away from banks. Banks do pretty badly in negative interest rates, but it's not clear that it would hurt technology companies. I mean, it does over the time and in a deep sense, because it destroys the economy. But you can probably find specific companies that do okay and invest in them. Right? So it's just such a perversion, the idea of negative interest rates. It's such a distortion. It cannot happen in a free market. And whenever the government is doing things that literally cannot happen in a free market, that they're desperate and it's insane. And it's insane. So it is truly statist. It is a contradiction to, it's in a sense a contradiction to laws of economics and finance. And therefore it can only be imposed at the point of a gun. Imposed at a point of a gun. So imagine negative interest rates means you give the bank money to hold in your checking accounts, and they charge you money for it. Or you buy an IOU, and you buy an IOU, and it's not they pay you interest, right? You pay them to borrow, to give them the money. It's insane. You can't even compute it because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't come together. It's so it's like the opposite of, it's like the negation of gravity, but it's not, because they actually do it. You can't negate gravity because it's metaphysical, but it's the man-made equivalent of that. And therefore they can use force on it. So the way to protect yourself from it is to find positive yielding assets that do well in a stagnating potentially in a stagflation economy. Although if you'd expect that if there was inflation, they wouldn't have negative interest rates. So more of a stagnating economy, And by the way, this is why people buy dollars and invest in the US, because if you're Japanese and you want a positive return on your investment, and Japan has negative interest rates, which it does, and has had over the last 20, 30 years on and off over time. What you really want is to get your money out of Japan. And to get your money out of Japan, you have to buy dollars. And then you take those dollars and invest them in the United States, the one economy in the world that hasn't had negative interest rates, and where the stock market has done very, very well, and where bond markets have done better than Japan or in Europe, and where other asset classes, real estate and other things, have done well. And if you're Japanese or European or Chinese for that matter, you want dollars. And it is that desire for dollars, which is what drives what's called the trade deficit. It's that desire of foreigners to have dollars so they can invest in the United States that causes them to invest locally in manufacturing for export to the United States. They structure the economy to export to the United States so that they can get the dollars, so they can pour those dollars back into the United States as investments. That's the prime driver. And that's why I don't think the dollar collapses as long as there's nowhere better to invest the money. And right now in the world, there's nowhere better to invest the money still. As pathetic as we are, the rest of the world is more pathetic. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, area code 917. I unmuted you. Can you hear me?
Hi, Yaron. It's Andrew.
Hey, Andrew. How's it going?
Good. I wanted to ask you about how a proper philosophy and maybe morality specifically can guide somebody when they experience setbacks in life. Something that stood out to me from your debate with Andrew Sullivan was the moment when you were talking to him about a steel worker or some kind of worker who's laid off in the Midwest. And Andrew Sullivan said basically, what do you expect him to do to move from the place where his grandparents, lived and where his children went to school and everything? And you were kind of like, yes. And he was shocked by that response. And what
it's my favorite part of the debate, by far my favorite part.
I loved it. But, on a serious note, it's kind of disturbing to me that, from a psychological perspective of what the altruist is telling that person in that circumstance.
Yeah.
Everybody faces these kind of setbacks and incurs certain weaknesses. These negatives that he's pointing out are true. But what the altruist is telling that person to do is to stay weak, not just process the weakness, but stay weak. That's the answer. And it's terrible, I think. So I wanted to just put it out to you and say, how would a proper morality kind of guide somebody in those moments that we all experience when there are challenges and setbacks in life to kind of reorient us towards values and living?
Well, that's exactly what a morality does. It reorients you towards values. So if you have a setback, the first thing that morality tells you is think about why, right? Try to understand what's happening, right? Is it your fault? Did you do something? What can you learn from this? How do you use this to improve yourself? Not in a superficial way, but in a real way, in the sense that if this was something that I caused, how do I not cause it again? How do I not make this happen again? Because I want a positive life. I want to move forward. I want to thrive. I don't want to live as a victim and with the setbacks. The first step is really be rational, figure out what's happened. Why is this happening right now? And for the steel worker, it could be, pick up some newspapers, look around, talk to people, and figure out that, hey, the economy's shifting. My job is being automated, or my job is being moved to Mexico or to China or wherever. It's not coming back. It's not that hard to gain a basic understanding of that, and then say, so that's step one. What's happening? Why is this happening? Is it me? Is it the world? Is it something? What's going on? And then the second step is, I can't live as a victim, right? And I won't live dependent on other people. So I even if in the world we live in, you accept unemployment insurance for a while, this is not the state with which I'm willing to win. I need to be productive. I need to take care of myself. I need to earn the living for myself. And then the question is, okay, what do I do? Are there other jobs that I can do as a steelworker? If not, can I get retrained? What are the opportunities for retraining? Where are they? Are there jobs that I can do in the meantime while I'm getting retrained so I can make a living and not be dependent on other people for my life while I'm training? Does it make sense for me to stay in Ohio? Or does it make sense to me to move to Western Arkansas or wherever the jobs are. All of that is what morality guides you. It basically says, think. I mean, that's the essential. Think. Think about the problem and find solutions, and don't accept victimhood, and don't accept living at the expense of other people. That is, figure out how to be productive again. Figure out how to get back on your feet. And that, that's what it does in any kind of setback. Your girlfriend broke up with you. Well, it's emotionally hard, but part of the process is, why? Did I do something? Was this a bad match? Was she, what's going on? What can I learn from this? Okay. And now what? If I want to have a girlfriend, then, what do I do now? And how do I learn from this experience? And at some point, and not necessarily the next day, but at some point, once emotionally you can handle it, you start dating again and so on. So it's the same process, but it requires introspection, and it requires a commitment to reality, to facts, to evidence, to being rational. And of course, underlying all this is a certain self-esteem, and that's what's lacking, right? Is the knowledge that you can figure out what happened, and that you can solve it, and that you can find a solution that allows you to live. And that confidence, that self-esteem, is to a large extent lacking in so many people, but also the expectation that they should do anything about it. I mean, conservatives, Andrew Sullivan's a conservative. Conservatives tell them, no, since your grandfather did the same job, you should do the same job. You shouldn't be expected to move. You shouldn't be expected to change your life. And of course, the left says, no, we expect you to be a victim, and we'll embrace your victimhood, celebrate your victimhood, and we'll subsidize your victimhood.
I think also it's interesting to me that Andrew Sullivan's reaction to you was kind of like, you're being cruel to these people. Yeah. But the moral inversion is such that he doesn't understand that he's being cruel to them by telling them.
Their lives are destroyed. And they're not, it's not an accident that they're on opioids and stuff like that. Because I've said this from the beginning, and I get a lot of flack for this because a lot of people think the opioid crisis is purely an issue of bad drugs or whatever. I don't think so. I think it's a huge psychological crisis. It's people who have lost people who have no self-esteem, people who are alienated from the world around them, people who are given up on life, and people who are not willing to take responsibility for themselves. Now, I'm not saying all people who are on opioids are like this, but a certain percentage of them, this is why it's an epidemic, why it's so big, right, is because many of them, I think, are such people. They're people who are using drugs to escape reality, and they're using opioids to escape reality, and some of them die as a consequence. But that is the consequence of the psychological state, a psychological state that our conventional morality, that the altruists of all forms, right and left, embrace and encourage. And it's criminal. It really is criminal.
Yes.
Thanks, Andrew. Great question. And that was also Brad Thompson's favorite part of the debate. I think I've got a video of just that section. I can't remember, but I did a whole show years ago on moving, on the fact that Americans don't move anymore, that they become very, that people measure how mobile Americans are in terms of moving state to state, and Americans are moving less and less, and how this whole attitude of what is it, the right to stagnate. Ayn Rand has an essay about the divine right to stagnate, that people just want to stagnate. And a lot of these conservatives, I think Bradley Thompson called them front porch conservatives. They want to just sit on their front porch like they imagine they did in the 1950s and just rock back and forth and not be challenged and not have the stress of life and everything in a sense to be provided for them. And that mentality is a mentality of stagnation. That mentality is a backward mentality. All right, let's take some Super Chat questions, and then we'll try to do one more round with you guys. Let's see. Do you think Donald Trump realistically is a symptom of a much larger problem that is a result of a broken system and a precarious, something oligarchy. I don't think it's an issue of oligarchy. I definitely think he's a symptom of a much larger problem, and definitely a symptom of a broken system. He is a symptom of a mixed economy. He is a symptom of a culture that is not a thinking culture, but an emoting culture. He is a symptom of the left kind of abandoning all semblance of reason and embracing egalitarianism, and the right not knowing how to combat that other than with hatred and with fear, because they again have abandoned reason. And while they still have a vague sense that they love the Constitution and what America used to represent, have no concrete knowledge and concrete understanding of what that is. And you saw that in the Tea Party, which was emotionally pro-American, but had no concept of what that meant. And Donald Trump was just an outcome, a symptom of that, of the fact that the right is emotional and the left is emotional, and the right is primarily reactive, not proactive, reactive to the left. Trump is a reaction to Obama. Trump is a reaction to identity politics. Trump is a reaction to the obsession of the New York Times with transgender rights. Trump is a reaction to, what is going on in the irrational world out there. So he is a symptom, and the bigger problem in the world is irrationality and emotionalism, which has resulted in tribalism, which again he is a symptom of. How was Ronald Reagan able to win 49 out of 50 states in his 1984 re-election? That seems impossible unless Americans wanted free markets. You have to remember, 1970s were a period of 60s and 70s, but primarily the late 60s and 70s were a period of immense cultural upheaval, a lot of violence. Remember that 3 major figures assassinated during the 1960s. 1960s and 70s saw the Vietnam War. We saw stagflation. We saw a massive, recession, people losing their jobs, high unemployment. And again, crime, darkness. America was a horrible place, a depressing place, a dark place. And Reagan came around, and initially in his first term, the economy struggled. It went into a deep recession in 1982. But by 1984, when he was up for re-election, the economy was recovering for the first time, a healthy recovery with no inflation. Inflation had been crushed by Paul Volcker and the Fed in the 81-82 period. We were getting a real economic recovery. The stock market had bottomed in, I forget the month, but in 1982, and it is now rebounding strongly. And Ronald Reagan projected this immense optimism and courageousness. And he was the exact opposite. I mean, the exact opposite of Trump, in the sense that he was all about the positive things that were going on in America. It was all about what was possible in America, what America could achieve. And it wasn't like he was this laissez-faire capitalist guy. He wasn't. And he certainly didn't govern that way. But he gave these great speeches about what was possible for America, the shining city on the hill, and we could succeed, and we could overcome everything, and we were going to get rich, and we were going to be successful. And a significant number of people in every state, a majority of people, bought into that, coming out of this dark period and suddenly seeing the sunshine and seeing economic growth, real economic growth, and seeing a president who projected this positive, optimistic, even though crime rates were still very, very high, there was really carnage in the streets of America. Even though the economy was just starting to take off, all of this, they bought into his message because it was so positive and optimistic. And it tells you something, that the American people today, the message they bought into, at least in the last election, was a message of pessimism, decay, carnage in the streets, things are falling apart, nothing's possible. and let's somehow put it all back together again, but no projection of a, make America great again, but no projection of a shining city in the hill. Who cares? But no real optimistic, positive message. And the left is the same way. They're all dark and pessimistic and terrible, and the world is terrible, and we're terrible, and America's terrible. And so both political parties now are the opposite of the extreme opposite of what Reagan was. I mean, a great example of this is his last public address as president was a short speech on immigration. And if you gave that speech today as a Republican, you'd be stoned. There's no way you would survive politically if you gave that speech. It's a moving, touching, amazing speech. You can find it on YouTube about the virtues of immigration and how important immigration is to this country and how foundational immigration is to this country. And today, there is no way you would get that. There is no way you would get that. What are some of your earliest entertaining hitchhiking stories? Isn't it much safer to hitchhike in Israel than America? Much safer to hitchhike in Israel than in America. Much, much safer. Hitchhiked all the time in Israel. My wife hitchhiked all the time in Israel when she was single and when she was married later by herself. And it was not an issue when I was there. So we hitchhiked all over Israel all the time, everywhere. In the US, it was dangerous. This was particularly dangerous in the 1970s. And I don't really have time today to go into it, because we've got so many super chat questions, and it doesn't seem that crucial. I'll just tell you the first hitchhiker, the first guy who stopped for me, when I was hitchhiking in LA, I went out to the I-5 to I-10, yes, and hitchhiked going east, and this guy stopped, and he turned out that he called himself an underground poet from San Francisco who was driving to the East Coast, but he landed up changing his mind in the middle. And, I drove with him into Arizona, but he kind of dropped me off in the middle of the desert. And then I had to continue hitchhiking from there. But I didn't know there was such a thing as an underground poet in those days. So I learned a lot during this hitchhiking tour. There were people who picked me up. I mean, this is my first experience of anti-Semitism, not but in terms of ignorance was while I was hitchhiking in the South, where people would pick me up and say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "I'm from Israel." And they'd say, "I hear there are a lot of Jews in Israel. What's that like?" Right? And I'd go, "Yeah. It's rough. A lot of Jews in Israel." Last thing I wanted to say is, yeah, I'm one of them. Or somebody literally asking me, I mean, this is a true story. Somebody literally asking me on a ride whether Jews had horns. Right? And there's a reason why people think Jews have horns. I don't know if you know why there is the myth that Jews have horns. You see, I don't have any. And that is that in the Bible, when Moses comes down from the mountain, he is described as, it's as if rays of light are coming out of his face, like he is projecting light. He is so, he's just seeing God. He is just being in the presence of God, and he is filled with light. And a ray, the word for ray in Hebrew is also the word for horn. It's the same word. Ray and horn are the same word in Hebrew. And in some of the translations, they got the word wrong. They got the translation wrong. So Moses came down with horns in his head, not with rays of light coming out of his head. Horns in his head. And if you look at Michelangelo's sculpture of Moses, he sculpted Moses with horns in his head. Right? Literally, there are horns there. You can just look up Michelangelo's Moses, and you will find the sculpture, and you'll see two horns on the side. And that is because of a bad translation of the Bible. So one wonders about religious people. Not only did they have the issue of where do these words even come from, but then the question is, are they even translated well from the original biblical language, which is probably Aramaic? Is it scary working in finance today, given that you can be prosecuted over nothing and risk prison time just for being productive and innovative? It is, the things you have to be careful not to do, and you have to follow the regulations. You have to toe the line. And I'm small enough that I don't think I'm in anybody's radar. So I don't think anybody's coming for me or gunning for me. If you're successful financially, it is an issue, but you play by the rules. I mean, the more successful you are, the more lawyers you hire, the more compliance officers you hire, the bigger your compliance division is. I have a almost full-time compliance officer at my fund. So you spend the resources, time, energy to do whatever you can to keep them off your back and to not give them any excuse to come after you. How can re-electing Trump make the dim hypothesis come true faster when Leonard Peikoff himself just donated $250 to the Trump campaign? Wow. That's a jump in logic. I don't understand how the first section of the sentence is related to the second sentence, section of the sentence. As I said before, I'm not going to comment on Leonard Peikoff donating $250 to Trump campaign. I haven't talked to him. And I don't think that's relevant to the first part of the question. As far as I know, maybe Leonard sees something I don't. There's always the possibility that Leonard Peikoff, who is, is more knowledgeable, he's smarter than I am, sees something I don't. I'm happy to be proven if that's the case. How can re-electing Trump make dim hypothesis come true or faster? The when, that makes no sense. Leonard Peikoff, support or not support of Trump is not related to whether dim comes faster or not. I've explained why it comes faster. In my view, if Trump wins the next election, the Republican Party is forever locked into a statist, nationalist, conservative, anti-founding fathers, anti-declaration of independence, anti-individual rights political party. And then you will have two types of political parties in the United States. You will have a socialist political party and a nationalist political party, both committed to statism. And I think under that scenario, there is no opposition in politics that even has a semblance of pro-free markets or pro-individual rights or capitalism or anything, or founding fathers or declaration. And I think in some scenario, it's likely that the Nationalist Party gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and ultimately takes over and becomes, as the dim hypothesis predicts, becomes a religious nationalist, authoritarian political party that dominates. I think Trump is already a step in the direction of authoritarianism, and a political party dedicated to Trumpism, dedicated to nationalism, in the future will only elevate more and more and more authoritarian candidates. And I think that's where we're heading. I think that's true even if Trump loses by a small margin, because if he loses by a small margin, then the nationalists within the Republican Party will say, the problem is not the message, the problem is the messenger. And what we need is somebody even more charismatic than Trump. And they will not, the Tucker Carlsons and the Hawleys will dominate the Republican Party, and they will try to find somebody even more charismatic than Trump to elevate into the party. And the dim hypothesis happens again much faster. I think the only way to slow down the dim hypothesis from becoming a reality is the slim hope that the Republican Party can get better in the sense of rediscovering some ideas around individual rights, freedom, capitalism, and so on, and the founding fathers. And I think the only way that happens is if Trump loses in a landslide, that the Republican Party comes to the conclusion that it's not just Trump that was bad, but the ideas of Trump that are bad, and seeks new people that have different ideas. I think that's the only chance somebody like Nikki Haley or like Ben Sasse or like some of the other better people within the Republican Party, and I'm assuming Nikki Haley and Ben Sasse are better people, but I think they are, have any kind of chance of being nominees in the future and being successful in the future. There's just no other way. The more Trump dominates the Republican Party, the more he will eviscerate the better elements within the Republican Party. And to the extent he does that, he speeds up them. That's the point. Is it child support the state initiating force if you don't sign a written contract saying you would pay until the child is 18? How can the government force you to pay for it? It's not only written contracts that are enforceable in law. When you have a child, you have initiated a contractual relationship, whether you want it or not. This is one of the reasons I'm pro-abortion. You should have every possibility for an out before you have a child, because a child becomes a contractual 18-year obligation. So I think it's completely legitimate for the state to force you to live up to that obligation, at least financially, if you can't in other ways, emotionally and as a father, right? So at least you should have to live up. So it's not true that the only contracts in life are explicit ones you sign. If you act in a way that initiates a contractual relationship, like having a child, then that contract, the state must, in its responsibility of protecting the rights of the child, must recognize that as an explicit contract. So I think child support is completely legitimate. All right. Yes, it's a long time. That's a long contract. 18 years is a long contract. That's why you shouldn't have kids unless you really want them. All right. I'm going to run through these and then we'll do one round. So no more super chat questions unless they're rich, high dollar amounts. And I'm going to run through our callers one more time and we'll call it a night. Where can you join next month's call-in show? You can join next month's call-in show by making a $25 or more monthly contribution to the Yaron Brook Show. You can do that on yaronbrookshow.com/support, on Patreon, on Patreon, and on Subscribestar, and even locals. And by the way, child support, I'm not even sure that the father has to do it, right? I'm not saying that it's the father's responsibilities. That partially depends on the contract between the father and mother, but certainly the parents are obligated. Absolutely. Have you read High Intensity Training the Mike Mentzer Way? If not, I think you will find it interesting. Consequently, that is how I find Ayn Rand. I know a lot of people who found Ayn Rand through Mike Mentzer. Actually had a brief telephone conversation with Mike Mentzer about a year before he died, before he passed away. He passed away at a relatively young age, sadly. I have not read that book, but I have read Body by Science, which I highly recommend, which is loosely, not loosely, I think to a large extent based on some of the work Mike Mentzer does. I think it takes it to the next step and is very scientific, I think, to the extent that I understand it. And I have in the past, at least, and to some extent today, trained based on high intensity, super slow kind of training methodologies. It's Doug McDuff, and I forget the name of the second author. It's called Body by Science. It's on Amazon. It's an excellent book. Again, I'm not saying that's an objectivist way of training, but Doug McDuff considers himself an objectivist. So does the other person whose name I forget, which is embarrassing, who is a huge Ayn Rand fan. Yeah, it was a good book, and I have for years I went to a studio that did super slow. Unfortunately, super slow high intensity. Unfortunately, there's no studio that I know of in Puerto Rico that does this, so I've had to not do it. I still do super slow with body weight, and I do Pilates. But I think it made sense to me, the whole Body by Science. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I can't vouch for it scientifically. Is the reason objectivism is so minor in the culture because most people today are unthinking and dishonest, i.e. worthless? To some extent, but I think it's the reason it's so minor in the culture is because it's fighting against 2,000 years of Christianity and all the secular philosophers and ideas, philosophies and ideas that Christianity has spurned. So it's fighting against this massive cultural trend, which is very, very difficult. So it just takes a long time. And what these philosophies, Christianity and the secular philosophies, have done is they've numbed the minds of people. They have, particularly the left has created an educational system that basically creates unthinking people and discourages, among some of them, productivity. So they're unthinking, they're not connected to reality, they don't understand the scientific method, and therefore they can't, objectivism doesn't connect with them in any meaningful way. Do you think people don't get the government is force? Yes, I think they don't get it, but to a large extent they don't want to get it because the implication is too harsh for them. So you can walk them through the example, you can show them its force, you can make it very concrete for them, and they evade it because if they accepted that and they still held that force is somehow bad, then they would have to change their minds, and they can't do that. So I think it's important to show people government is force, but don't expect them to embrace that. It's very, very difficult for them because it would really challenge much of what they think about the world. We have spent more than $1 federal dollar per dollar of GDP growth in the past few years. Okay. Does this mean that the federal spending multiplier is now negative? Or is federal spending not correlated with GDP growth at all? I don't think federal spending is necessarily correlated with GDP growth. It very much depends on how the money is spent. I mean, it has to be correlated because the way GDP is measured, it measures government consumption, government spending is part of the measure. So it has to be correlated. It becomes a weaker and weaker depending on how the money is used. The more it is basically goes to build bridges to nowhere, the less correlated it becomes with GDP. The more it pays people to dig ditches and fill them up, the less it's correlated. There are more productive and less productive ways for the government to spend that money in terms of if your measure is GDP. It's always wrong, but it can be more or less productive. But we have right now the amount of money the government is spending way outpaces the growth in GDP in the last few years. Just what's being done right now in the stimulus package, and it's going to have significant negative consequences to GDP to the point where I think GDP is going to be negative in the years to come. Not negative, zero in the years to come, or close to zero. It truly is. I mean, you'll get a big spur of GDP when the economy recovers, and it will recover to the baseline of where it was, and then it's just going to be flat. We're going to get no growth for a long time because of the distortions, malinvestments, dislocations that government spending is creating. And in that sense, it's negatively correlated with GDP in the long run. In the long run, government spending is negatively correlated at this point, at these levels. All right, let's go back to our callers. Roy, you get a second question, but you are muted.
I am no longer muted.
You are no longer muted.
Yeah, I'll talk. Have you caught any of the Metropolitan Opera's daily streaming of past performances?
Sadly, I have not, and to a large extent, I don't have a good sound system here in Puerto Rico. My good sound system is in California, and when I play the opera on my lousy speaker that I have here, it defeats the purpose. So,
all right, I'll increase my monthly contribution, buy a better speaker. Yeah, it's really worth it. Some of them have been spectacularly good, very moving, glorious, and well worth it.
Yeah, no, I used to go I went a few times to see where they streamed into theaters, and where you sat in a cinema seat and watched them, and it was fantastic. It was so
Kathy Cross and I went to see such a screening of Carmen.
Good.
A few years ago. Yeah, right. So let me slip in one quickie. It's not a question. It's sort of maybe a fun fact. Episode 6 of season 5 of The Wire was directed by the woman who directed Mr. Jones.
Oh, that's right. I read in her bio that she had directed some episodes in The Wire. So it's season 5, episode 6?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
pretty sure that's the one because that's what I'm up to. And I
Cool.
suddenly saw her name and said, "Ooh," and yeah.
Yeah, I'm meaning to look up some of our other movies to see if there's a theme that goes through them.
There's Europe, or Europa.
Yeah, Europa.
If you've not seen it, it's also extremely good.
Yep. Yeah, I saw it. I've seen it. I saw it years ago, but I haven't seen the other movies she's made. So I'm curious to see if there's anything there.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Roy.
Sure.
Nick. Nick.
Yeah, we're on.
Yep.
You hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what's it going to take to get Atlas Shrugged done again? What has to happen in terms of movie rights, screenplay, money that has to be raised? You know, what has to happen for it to happen, or to get the process going again? Nobody talks about it anymore.
Well, the last time I talked to somebody about it was probably a year and a half ago, something like that. There's a particular business person who has bought the rights from the person who had it, who made that horrible 3-part Atlas Shrugged in the past. He bought the rights from him, or at least a portion of them. And he was the challenge he found was that he wants a world-class screenwriter, and none of them will do it. None of them will do it. And he can't get, like, he wants to do it on Netflix, on HBO or something like that, and he can't get them interested unless it's a world-class screenwriter. He can't get producers. Money's not the issue. Money was never the issue. Has never been the issue. It's the talent. It's getting the talent.
Do you think it'll happen in our lifetime?
Yeah, I think there's a chance. I'm not saying a good version will happen in our lifetime. Better than the last one.
Well, you know what? Even the last one, I watched a 2-minute flick of Francisco Dacona's meaning of money. What is the meaning of money? And it sent chills down my spine.
Yeah, but that's because you know the book. The whole point of the movie is not to sell chills down your spine.
Okay.
New people.
It had an impact.
Yeah.
I mean, if you splice, I'm not talking about the whole movie. I'm just splicing.
Maybe
certain parts.
Maybe.
I mean, it's powerful.
Yeah.
The visual, the people learn visually today.
Yeah. No, I want a movie, but I just think those 3 movies were particularly bad. Even the first one was not good, although the second and third one were much worse. So I'd like to see a good movie made. But I've seen scripts that big-time Hollywood screenwriters have written, and you wouldn't believe how bad they are. So to get a decent script, I think you could get a decent script, but to get a decent script from a well-known person who Hollywood would back, maybe in our lifetime, but not anytime soon. Yeah, and not given the direction of the country, maybe. All right, Stephen.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the WTO protests in Seattle in the late 90s. I don't really remember kind of what the conversation was around those and whether they add any context to what's going on in Portland and Seattle these days.
Sure. I mean, I think it was the launch of this kind of anti-liberal, in the good sense of the word liberal, anti-free markets, anti-freedom, extreme left ideology that was nihilistic. They were rioting in the streets, and it was in Seattle because that's where the WTO was meeting that year. And I remember being horrified by it and the number of people that participated in it. And Antifa that was part of how Antifa came to America. It was part of Antifa's mission, was to be anti these multinational kind of organizations like the World Trade Organization, because they were spreading what's called now neoliberalism or free markets or free trade around the world. And, it definitely was the precursor to a lot of leftist organizations, a lot of leftist thinking. I think it played really well in leftist circles in 1998 or 9, whenever it happened. And they were inspired by it. And if you think about the Occupy Wall Street movement was inspired by it. And of course, a lot of what's going on right now was inspired by the Occupy. I mean, a lot of the places in Portland and Seattle and other places around the country where there have been riots were places that Occupy Wall Street pitched tents and hung out for months on end during that period. And you reminding me of that. One of the shocking things looking back at the WTO and the WTO protests is that now what's shocking about it is that both left and right agree with the protesters. That is, the mainstream now is where the protesters were in 99. That is, everybody's against the WTO. Trump is viciously against the WTO. The national conservatives against the WTO. The left, of course, has always been against the WTO. Certainly the Bernie Sanders left. And you've got now the right and the left combining in their hatred of capitalism and free trade. And that I would have never expected looking back to that period. So it's really sad. Really sad. Okay, let's.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Let's go to Eric.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. What do you tell people that think racism is everywhere and even call themselves a racist because they are white and are buying into the evil concepts of white privilege and white guilt and whiteness, stuff like that? This frustrates me so much, but I just don't know how to communicate with them, what to tell them when they think like that.
I mean, I think you have to tell them that as far as you know, and you know them well, they are not racist. You have to unpack what racism is. Let them try to tell you, define it, because they can't. Tell them what the last racist thing they did was. Do they have they joined the KKK lately? Have they do they avoid people of certain color? What is it exactly that they do that is racist? So don't let them be at the abstract level. The level of I'm white, it's systemic, that's BS. That's just floating, it means nothing. What actually have they done? What do they consider to be a racist act? Have they ever done a racist act? And what does racism actually mean? Who can be a racist? What does it entail? And I think if you break it down for them and they're honest, then they'll try and see it. Then they'll start seeing it.
Right. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Generally, the more you can concretize ideas for people, get them at the concrete level, show them what the abstract ideas mean in a concrete sense, the better it is. That's where you can get them to think about it.
Part of the problem too is the definition of terms. Everyone doesn't have the same definition either.
Force them to define it and to give you examples of it.
Right.
And then say that's not racism. Racism is, and be prepared for your definition of racism. Racism has always meant this. When Martin Luther King talked about racism, this is what he talked about, and insist that that's what racism is, and that what they're referring to is some new, convoluted definition that doesn't really mean anything, and indeed is racist in and of itself, because it treats whites differently than it does blacks. That's racist.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right, Emmet.
Yes, thanks. I wanted to second that I have been doing Body by Science for a number of years now, and I've never been in better shape. So, yeah, it's great system. Yep. Have you had a chance yet to watch the series Bosch? And if so, what do you think of it?
I have not had a chance.
On your list?
It's on my list. I have not had a chance.
It's really good. I highly recommend it. So
good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll once I finish what I'm watching now, I need to convince my wife to start watching it.
Okay.
I used to watch stuff by myself because I traveled all the time, But now, whatever I watch has to be, my wife has to agree to. So I don't, I'm not traveling. Yeah. Maybe life will return one day to normal. Thanks, Emmett.
Thank you.
All right, Tom.
Thanks, Yaron. Do people desire to be ruled and taken care of, told what to do, what to think by authorities because they view individualism and personal responsibility as a burden and not a benefit? Yeah. And is true freedom simply just too scary for most people?
Yes. The bottom line is yes, and always has been, and that's why people have never fought for it. It's not just an issue of scary. Some people can't imagine it. It requires a certain level of imagination to even see it, to even imagine what it would be like, to even project it into your future. And then it requires self-esteem to say, yeah, that's a world I want, because that's a world where I am responsible for me. And that requires huge amounts of self-esteem. There's a whole field of psychology of freedom. And the interaction between philosophy and psychology is a fascinating field, right? Because they condition each other. It's not enough to do philosophy. If people are screwed up psychologically, the philosophy won't help. You need them to go hand in hand. The philosophy can help somebody get a better psychology, but that's not a guarantee. So you need self-esteem. You need to embrace the challenge, to want the challenge, and you need to want to live. You need to have chosen to live. And most people just drift. Unfortunately, most people drift in life. They don't live with a capital L. They stay alive, or or you might say they die slowly, but they don't live. And they don't live because they don't want to, or because they've chosen not to. And some of it is a lack of ability to project what that would be. And some of it is laziness. Living requires effort, thinking requires effort. And some of it is a lack of self-esteem. And they're all intertwined. They're all connected. And it's tragic because all these people could be living, right? And what a waste of a life. What a waste of a life.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. All right. I think it's Andrew. 917's Andrew, right? Was anybody else I missed? Who else? If somebody else, I didn't ask a second question, then unmute yourself. Otherwise, it's 917. You there?
Hey, Yaron.
Hey.
I wanted to ask you about, just run my thinking by you about an issue about like fear of being judged by other people.
Yep.
I think it's a problem that a lot of people have. And the way I think objectivism has something to say about it.
Yep.
That, the way it's being kind of addressed, and I think it's good that it's being addressed. It's kind of in this area of emotionally de-repressing and being real and being your authentic, real self with people. The way it's being addressed kind of in the mainstream experts is becoming comfortable with other people's opinions of you, not making too big a deal about people's negative opinions about you. I think that's a lot of the focus of kind of self-development that is being undergone. And I do think that there's value in that. But I also think that there's not enough focus as an objectivist. I would say there's not enough focus on when you're putting yourself out there in professional situations or in personal situations. And it's really important to put yourself out there and be confident. But are you proud of yourself as a product, putting yourself out there and
even viewing yourself as a product? I mean, how many people think of it that way? Because, most intellectuals today tell us that we're creations of others. We're not self-created.
Right. And, some of this fear of judgment, I think comes from, a certain vulnerability that people feel in not kind of having a fully formed positive vision of themselves. A lot of that would be taken care of if somebody built up their self-esteem, and still might need to deal with certain issues, psychological issues of, being comfortable with negative feedback and things like that. But it wouldn't be the primary focus.
Absolutely.
That's kind of my thinking on it.
Yeah, so it's absolutely. So it's an issue, deep down, it's an issue of self-esteem. It's an issue of how you hold yourself. And self-esteem depends on the virtue of pride. And the virtue of pride is an action that you must take. Pride requires you to take this action that is the seeking out of moral perfection, the trying to be the best that you can be, the idea that you are self-made being. So you have to unpack all these things. You have to recognize your self-made being. It's in your power to make your soul. It's in your power to turn yourself into the kind of human being you want to be, the kind of person you want to be, given what biology has given you. And that it then is your moral responsibility to do that you have the power and you have the moral responsibility to do that. It's called the virtue of pride. And that the reward for doing that is this sense of self-esteem. And that if you do that, and if you recognize the independence in your own mind, then other people's judgments of you become less and less important, to the point where the judgment should be, if somebody is judging me in a way that's unjust and wrong, then it's their problem and their loss. Why should I care? And if somebody is judging me badly and they're right, then I should pay attention because I should get better. And that's ultimately the attitude you want to have. It's why, Rourke can tell Tui, when Tui says, "What do you think of me?" And Rourke says, "I don't think of you." And he really doesn't, because what's the point, right? Tui's wrong. Yeah. So people who are wrong provide no value to you, there's no point in wasting 1 second of your precious time thinking about them and thinking about their judgment of you. So the point of making your own soul, of being an independent thinker, and of taking pride seriously and trying to be as good as you can be, is to attain the kind of self-esteem where you can just tell the guy who's not only thinking bad thoughts about you, writing them, distributing them to the masses, and trying to destroy you, you can tell them, "I don't really think about you."
And I think that second aspect of it that you mentioned is important too, of you're not so afraid if somebody judges you in a way that is true and it's negative, then
Absolutely.
You have the confidence to be able to, take what you can and construct something better from it.
Absolutely. And look, another part of this is, and something we're discouraged from doing in the culture in which we live, is we should be judging everybody around us. You should judge, right? I mean, I think Rand, one of the few times she quotes the Bible, I think it's something like, "Judge and be prepared to be judged," right? Judging is what life's about. You're supposed to go around and saying, "Good person for me, bad person for me, good for me, bad for me. Stay away from the bad people, embrace the good people." I mean, that's what life, dealing with other people in life, is about. It's about judging them, figuring out who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, and the gradations of each, right? Because otherwise you'll be stuck hanging out with bad people, and that will be bad for you. All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, guys. Thanks to all my supporters. Thanks particularly to those who have been part of the show today. Thanks for the questions and for your ongoing support. Thanks for everybody participating in the Super Chat, and for everybody who supports the show, whether via Super Chat or via monthly contribution. Those of you who would like to support the show, you can do so on Patreon, on Subscribestar, and on the yaronbrookshow.com/support website. And I will be back probably tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, then Monday, and I will see you all then. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.